It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome to the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is Thursday, August 10th, and so happy for you joining us. We are ready to start another day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. So today we have an exciting podcast for you. We have sermons in the sky, QNA Thursday, and of course commentaries, updates, and news on what is happening around the world in this history today. All right, everyone, how are you doing? Yes, it is Thursday. We're getting close to the end of the week, and I am super thankful and happy. A little bit tired the last 2 days. Actually, no, today was really good. Yesterday, I was super tired because I had insomnia and I couldn't sleep. But, yeah, super thankful. We had a great message last night. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you haven't yet, go ahead, leave a like and comment to build our community. Just super happy for everyone joining us every weekday on the Morning Star Drive. So let's get up and support each other each and every day. This week's Sunday message title is Learn From Me Again. And I hope you guys are realizing a lot from this week's message. And I'm sure you'll realize even more from the Wednesday message. So yeah, it's, we're at the end of the meat of the week, right? And tomorrow's going to be the tail end. And just so happy to see us pushing through August. Guys, a third of August is done. August 10th, right? It's August 10th. It's a third is already done. We've gone through 10 days of August. I am super happy. Coming up this Sunday, there's going to be another demonstration or peaceful protest over there in Korea. It'll be in Busan. I actually saw that there was an advertisement. Yeah, there's an advertisement at the Busan subway station. I think it's like 5 to 6:30 p.m., but which is kind of tough because that's like 2 a.m. for me. That's like 1 a.m. for me over here. Yeah, it's tough. I do watch a little bit of these protests, and I kind of put in my 2 cents there. But I'm excited to hear how many people from Busan are actually going to be joining that protest. I'm really excited because I know that Busan is super passionate. The character of that city is very fun and very passionate. So I do think a ton of people go out, and I actually think they're going to try to challenge the 12,000 that came out in Seoul. I'm not sure if they can reach that amount, but I'm definitely certain they're going to be more than Daejeon. Daejeon was about 3,000. Yeah, I think Busan is going to hit way more than that. I really do, because just knowing the character of that city also. A lot of people are talking about it too. A lot of people are talking about these protests, and I didn't know they were happening every single week. But when you read that article on Tuesday, you see they are having these protests every single week. So I just hope it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I can't wait for August 20th because I know that the people in Daejeon are going to be going up to Daejeon and Kumsan. I think they'll be going up to Seoul for that. I'm not sure about Busan because it's kind of far. But let's see how many people come out for that day. I think August 20th is going to be wild. It's going to be pretty wild. So I'm excited about that. I know a lot of people are going to Korea to visit and such, and I always ask, hey, you going to join the demonstrations and stuff? A lot of them won't be able to because I think it's because they're not going to be in the area, but it's going to be very interesting to see because I know that there's some foreigners that have joined some of these demonstrations too. I had an interesting conversation with a good friend of mine, a leader, the other day. And they were talking about, we were talking together about the male-female ratio. And this is a great leader. This leader is talking already about a 5-year plan to bring the ratio back 1-to-1, which I think is great. This person's already thinking 5 years ahead in advance. And I think that is the best way to do it because you're not going to be able to restore the ratio in 1 or 2 years. I think 5 years is quite fair to try and get it back to a place where it should be. But it's I thought it was like, yeah, this is a valiant effort. 5 years to bring the evangelism back to where it is. And I think their church is around 3-to-1 right now. Like, no, for every guy, there's 3 girls. It's 1-to-3. One male for every 3 females. right? Which is kind of quite normal. But if you're going to work for 5 years, I think you can bring that back up to, you can bring it to par, that ratio back. But there is one thing that I do bring up to church leaders, and I do think it's something that you guys have to think about, like the reality of your past, present, and future of your church. Now, what does this mean? It means that I would actually split up your church into 3 different categories. Now, what does that mean? Well, split your church into 3 different categories means the people who are not ready for marriage, which means like campus SS, right? That's one category. And you look at the ratio of girls to guys there. And then you look at career, which is those that are getting married, look at that ratio. And then you look at people who are already married or not going to get married, and that's another group of people. Those are non-candidates, right? And the reason why you have to split these into 3 is because you get a more realistic, it's like a reality check of the situation at your church, right? So those in campus SS, these are the people that are going to get married in the future. That's your future situation. If you look at your SS in campus, you can see the ratio for what it's going to be like 10 years down the road, right? The people in the career department, or in some countries they call it the youth department, you look at the career department and you're going to see the present situation. What is the situation right now? Right? And you get to check the ratio there of, oh, this is our real situation right now. And then at the end, you're going to look at the non-candidates, which is people who are already married and people who are choosing not to get married. And that's kind of the past situation. It's already done. They're in the past. They've already got married. They've already chosen not to get married. That's a past situation. And all 3 of these categories are very, very important because it gives you an idea of what your past, present, and future is like. Right? So let me give an example. When you look at what are we trying to get towards? And I talked about this on Monday. It's about getting it so that we have evangelism will hit evangelism. The majority of people coming to church, the majority mean over 50% are going to be people that are born into Providence. And that's kind of where we're trying to get towards, where it becomes something stable, right? So when I was looking even at the statistics in the Protestant church has been around for 400 years. And the situation right now, after 400 years, the Protestant church, the average is 55% of the church is married. So over half the church is married, and if you're looking at most families, currently in America or Canada, where most of the Protestant churches are, you're looking at having about 2 children per. Which means that it's not just half the church that is married. You're going to have those people producing 1-for-1 new church members because they're going to be born into it. So that's a huge statistic that we look at and say, yeah, after 400 years, they're already at 55% of the church that is married. So when you look at the past, which means you look at the married and the people who choose not to get married, they are the past. Right? They're already done getting married, right? They're already done. And this stat is good to know. It shows how close we are to becoming a mainstream religion because we need over 50%, right? So if the Protestant church is at 55%, take a look at your past. Look at the people in your church that are married or not choosing to get married and see if it reaches over 55%. Well, I wouldn't even look at those that are choosing not to get married because they can't have children, right? Look at your married couples and see how many of them, what percentage of the church are going to be, that are married. Right? And the goal we're looking at is over 50%. Like that's what eventually it's supposed to reach, over 50%, right? And that's a very, very good stat. If it's more than 50, like if it's kind of extreme, like 60, 70%, it means that you have a very bleak future, meaning you don't have very many young people, right? So that's why you're looking at, you want to have about a little bit over 50% of your church is going to be married, which means you're going to have enough young people in the church too. It's not going to be like oversaturated. And if it's the opposite, it means that, we're still in a growth stage of the church if your married couples are like well under 50%. So looking at that first category are the people who are already married, you're going to see the past, right? And it shows us how close we are to becoming the mainstream religion. Now, the next one is the present. The present are the people in the career or youth department. And these are the people who are getting ready to get married right now. And when you look at the ratio of the people that are getting right now, it's this is kind of like the realistic situation. I think this is what reality is. Now, what does that mean? So remember I told you there was a friend of mine, a leader who has a church, and the ratio is for every male, there's 3 girls, right? However, when you split into 3 categories, we found out that the career or youth department is not 3-to-1. It's actually 0 guys and 6 girls just in that church. So if you think about it like that, it's like, oh, okay, then the situation is much different than we think. Because if you present the ratio as the total of the church, what happens is it could be deceiving, right? It could be deceiving either one way or the other, right? So let's pretend the church is like, I just told you that church is 1 to 3. But when you go to the career, people getting married right now, it's 0 to 6. There's a stark difference of 0 to 6 and 1 to 3. 0 to 6 means hopeless, right? There's 0 guys there, right? And 1 to 3 means, oh, there's a 33.33% chance, right? That kind of thing there. It's like there is some hope there. So when we look at this, we have to think about this very, very carefully. And we have to think about it in a way that we're understanding the situation so we know how to deal with it. Right? We need to know how to deal with, this is our current situation right now. We really, really need guys for the present, right? Looking at the entire church ratio is misleading because you could have like say 1 to 2, but yet in the people who are getting married, it could be like 1 to 5. Do you know what I mean? Because you have a ton of married people and there's a lot of males in the married people, right? So that's like, oh, that doesn't really make any, then you're gonna be like, oh, wow, it's 1 to 2. But then when you get to the career department and the people who are getting married right now, you get a better look of the ratio that we're looking at right now. And, this is not for people to feel like, oh my gosh, it's hopeless. What are we gonna do? It's not about this. It's about leadership. I'm gonna talk about leadership at the very end of this, but the leadership becomes such a huge role here. The last of the 3 groups is the future, and that's looking at the SS campus. These are the people who are going to get married in not the near future, but in the far future, right? And if you look at this group of people, it gives you an idea of what will happen in the future and how much effort we need to put into that group. So imagine you have the campus SS and they are at par. The ratio is 1 to 1, which means that you're not really so worried about that group, right? But if it's 1 to 6 or something like that, then you're gonna be like, okay, we gotta start working on this, right? Even when I was at, some of the churches I visit, I go into the church I'm visiting and I look at the ratio. I just do because I know it's such an important thing right now, is I'll look at the church like, oh, look at this. The church at the moment is 1 to 3. However, when you look at the people who are the present, which means those in the career department, those who are about to get married, it's 1 to 6. Do you know what I mean? So that's why this is something where you get a good realistic, like a reality check in what we need to do to prepare for the future, right? And, this is the thing. My personal thing right now is this, like looking at those 3 different levels of your church, you got to figure out which area needs the most help. Where's the most important focus right now, right? And it's not just going to be the future, because I know that a lot of churches are very, very focused on campus and SS, but it can't just be for the future, because that means you're throwing away the present, right? It's not just about going to the campus, not just about getting male campus and SS, but, you have to look at the present also. Is right now, like we've had so much focus on campus and SS that we neglect the career in the youth department, but that's the actual present we're dealing with when it comes to the ratio and about marriage itself, right? And right now, if you look at just reality, that's the problem we're facing is the present. That's the big problem. Like we can't just focus only on campus SS. We need to figure out ways for right now. And like the reason I'm talking about this and the reason we need to be able to look at the reality of all of our church or our country situations, it's because this has to do with leadership. And I think this is something that if you think about this, if you have strong leadership in place, strong leadership would have seen this coming a long time ago. You know what I mean? Like leadership has the vision and the foresight to look at the future so we don't have to deal with situations like we're dealing right now. And this is something that good leadership should see. looking at the big picture, catching trends, seeing what needs to be done, right? Like catching the trend meaning, oh, wow, there's a ton of girls coming. Oh, what's the problem? Well, the problem is if you don't have enough guys, they're not going to get married in the future. So we got to start focusing on guys before it reaches that group becomes the present, right? It's kind of like the big situation in China. China has a terrible situation right now with marriage because, 15 years ago, they had the one-child policy. And because they had the one-child policy, the biggest problems they were having back then was that, especially in Asian culture, males are more important than females. So you had a lot of families, since you can only have one child, they all wanted males. So even if they had a female, they would throw them away. Like they would actually throw them away in a field until they got a male heir. Do you know what I mean? So what happens is, from 15 years ago, that's one generation ago, they were like, 15 years is when they stopped the one-child rule, but they've had that rule of one-child policy for like 20 years or so, which means that now you're dealing with the problem of you have so many males, but not enough females. So then it's kind of the opposite of what's in Providence. These girls become so valuable that they can pick and choose whoever they want, right? And they can be very, very picky about it. And the guys have no girls out there for them to marry. And that's the huge problem China is dealing with right now. Yeah, they were like, oh my gosh, our population is growing too quickly, so let's put the one-child rule in. But the leadership in China didn't see that far into the future to say, whoa, we're going to be dealing with this type of problem, right? And this is why I'm saying leadership is that important. Leadership has to be looking 5 to 10 years into the future. They have to have the vision, the foresight, looking at the statistics of your country, of your church, trying to figure out what is the best way to do these things. And sadly, the thing is, this is not something that people are just born with. Right? Leaders are not just automatically having you're a leader now. Oh my gosh, I'm starting to have vision and I'm starting to look 5 to 10. No, it's not something that you just get because you're a leader. You're either born with vision or you need to be trained and taught vision. It's one of those two. And people who are born with vision and foresight, that's like 2.5% of the population. It's very, very small. So you're looking at 97.5% of the people. Think about that. 97.5% of the people are not born with vision and foresight. They're not born with that type of leadership, which means that 97.5% is almost 100. You're looking at very few people are going to have that. Which means that they need to be trained. They need to be taught about vision. They need to be they need to be taught how to look at the situation of the churches or the country and be able to see the problems that are going to happen in the future. And this is a big thing. If we don't have that leadership training system, we end up losing out in different areas. And it's something that we should be considering for the future, that this leadership plays such a huge and massive role when it comes to big picture leadership, right? A lot of the times when I look at Providence as a whole, it's really, really into the micro. Like that's what, a lot of, when I look at Providence in the way that we hear about it in the messages, it's like, oh, make sure each and every person is doing well. Oh, just make sure that we manage everyone well. It's a very micro look into each church and into the countries. Like, oh, is everyone being taken care of? And the answer is, yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's possible that every single person was taken care of. And that's great. However, if you don't look at the macro, then in the future, even though you take care of every person individually, you may not take care of them as a whole. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can make sure that everyone is happy, but then in the end, if the ratio is 1 to 5, guess what? No matter how much you you manage at the micro level, they're not going to be happy if they can't find a spouse, right? That is a macro look, right? And what I find is Providence, when it comes to leadership, it's very much into the micro and not enough leaders look at the macro, right? And the macro is just as important, right? Because the macro gives us the direction and the goal we're heading towards. What is the vision? What do we want to become? What do we want to be, right? In most cases, like even if you look at the individual people, even individuals lack the macro. Why? All they think about is, I got to go to university to go get a job so that I can make money. And then if I have money, then I can get married and then have children. Like it's looking at the small things I need to do right now. However, it's the wrong way to look at it. The right way you're supposed to look at it is, who am I? Right? What is my future? What is my vision? What do I want to be? What do I truly want to be? Right? It's not about I want to be someone who makes 100,000. That's not a vision, right? That's just a goal to reach some certain type of money amount. When we're talking about a vision, who do I want to be as a person? What do I want to do as a job, right? Or what do I want to do, like looking at like my legacy or looking at something for the future, like the big picture, like people who want to become amazing fathers, right? Amazing parents, people who can raise their children in the best way. Like they can raise children, to be godly and this and that. Like they're looking at this such a long macro level. Like I want to be this type of husband and father and person kind of thing. And then they're going to realize that if you want to become that type of person, there's a lot of these small things and goals that you have to reach to get there. Because let's just say, I'll take one of my things I really want is to raise my children properly, to become godly people that are going to lead the future. Then what do I need to do? I need to be spiritual. I need to work on my pre-dawn. I got to listen to the message. I got to put the words of God into action, because if I can't do it, how can I lead my children, right? Then I'm looking at the big picture and seeing all the small things I need to get there. You know what I mean? There's a huge difference for me just saying, yeah, I'm going to go to university. What are you going to be? I don't know. Like, I got to do something, so maybe I'll just do business. Oh, maybe I'll just do this, but I'm not really sure. There's no vision, right? There's no direction, right? And that's something that, we have to look at not only as individuals, but as in leadership too. We've got to see the big picture first. We need to know where we're going, where we're headed. What do we want from this country? What do we want from this church? What does this church want to become? And that's going to change everything, right? And that's something we really, really need to consider for the future, is the type of leadership and the expectations of leadership we should have, that it shouldn't just be people who run and work really hard. No, that's not leadership. That might be leadership of self, but that's not leadership of a whole, right? And many people, like I do think that we have to think very carefully the next steps we're going to make for the future and make big plans. Just like this leader I talked to, 5-year plan to bring it back to par. 5-year plan. And I'm like, yeah, that's realistic, because you can't get it done in 1 or 2 years. Maybe not even 3 years could you get that done. When you look at the reality of the churches, you have to look at like 5 years down the road, right? Like even when I'm talking about making an online church and such, I'm not thinking about making an online church right now. I'm looking 4 steps away. So what we're like, oh, if we want to have an online church, what do we need? What do we need to do first? What are the stages and the phases? And we have a 4-phase plan that's going to last 2 years before this online church comes. Phase 1 is the Discord for the lecturers. I still have to have my meeting with IMD, and then we'll open it up. So we'll have all the lecturers come together, helping each other out, sharing resources, getting the content that we can make great lectures. So phase 2 is a website that has professional grade lectures and Q&A videos, so that members in a church can use them to teach their newcomers, because we have a lack of manpower, a lack of lectures and stuff, but you can use this website instead, right? Because, the lecturers can't go they're only one body. They can only go one place at a time, right? So it's like, that brings us to the first stage. The third stage, phase 3, we're most likely going to be going into lecture training program. And then finally, phase 4, which would be 2 years later, is going to be an online church, and everything is progressively building step by step by step. And it's not going to be like, oh, let's do it right now. And we end up, a lot of times when you rush something or you don't have an actual plan for it, you end up failing, right? Like, oh, it didn't work out. And then people start giving up on those things. Right? So that is something that we should be considering, not only for our individual selves, but for especially when it comes to our leadership. We should have the expectation that leaders will see the difficulties we're having right now that will actually become even greater in the future, kind of like we're facing right now with the male to female ratio, right? And I think, it's a hot topic because it's a present problem. It really is. So I hope it's something that all of us can start thinking about too, having the foresight of our own life, planning 5-10 years ahead, and also understanding that this is something that's absolutely necessary for our churches and for our countries too, right? So that's one of the big thoughts that I was thinking about over the last 2 days. Over the last 24 hours actually. Did you guys see the poll yet? Yeah, I talked about the poll the last couple of days, but now we have a ton of people voting on the poll. It's already like over 80, and I found it interesting to see what people were actually voting for. I found it very, very interesting, and I think over 80 people have voted, and still 64% say better community, 19% say better organizational system. 10% say evangelism, and 6% say having children, right? So I was looking at that, I was like, oh, that's quite interesting that there's the vast majority is at better community. And like I said, I am studying and looking at different statistics of like Christian churches, Muslim churches, like how are they growing? What's the best way that they're growing right now? I found it very, very interesting that it's, when you look at the statistics, because the most important thing is we look at what's happening right now, and when you look at how they are growing, like churches like Protestant church, Muslim, the Muslim faith, all these other different places, you're gonna be like, oh, this is much different than I thought, right? So I think it's something that we do have to. I will talk about it in tomorrow's podcast, but yeah, this is kind of be like your last chance to vote for what will be the best way to grow the church in the long term. Right? So hope you guys will go ahead and vote for that one. Okay. So yeah, there it is. That is kind of the couple of thoughts and the things that I was thinking about over the last 24 hours and such. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. We're gonna get into the Q&A Thursday. Really, really good one today. Two really, really good questions. So let's get into our first break of the day.
He's awesome, that's right. That's right.
The Lord is absolutely fulfilled the will with his heart, will, and life.
He is awesome, that's right. That's right.
God, I'm convicted. I'll keep God's purpose for all time. With love in my heart, I'll walk this path rejoicing for life. Life is awesome when I'm living with the Lord. My life is finally made the will of God come true. I'm so proud of my life. Now my future is so bright. My spirit is shining. Oh, awesome life.
Whatever they say, I will never give up on the will.
I know that my life's so awesome. Met and established by God Almighty. Provi is God's history.
It is awesome, that's right. That's right.
With all my life, I'll always protect this history, the Lord and his will.
I am awesome, that's right. That's right.
God, I'm convicted. I walk this path and testify. With love in my heart, I sing it off with thanks on high. Life is awesome when I'm living with the Lord. My life is finally made the will of God come true. I'm so proud of my life. Now my future is so bright. My spirit is shining. Oh, awesome life.
Whatever they say, I will never give up on the will.
I know that my life's so awesome.
For God's will of creation, I raise my level with the Lord always until forever. When we don't know what's boring, since I know I'm all in my heart, in my mind, in my thoughts and actions. I change through the Lord's charisma, and I'm deeply rooted in this history. I'm always the ace, I won't be shaken. Word is the base of who you can't mistake it.
I chose my direction. I'm resolute that it's my lifetime career. I've received the Lord's thoughts, fulfill the purpose with him.
Look, just is how awesome our life has become.
I'm so proud of my life.
Even like it that I look, we're making history.
Now my future's so
Since
bright.
I'm soaring up a life that comes out from the heavens.
My spirit is
My
shining.
spirit shines because I love the Lord forever, always.
Awesome life.
Whatever they say, I will never give up on the will.
I'm so proud of my life.
Even like it that I look, we're making history.
Now my future's so
Since I'm
bright.
soaring up a life that comes out from the heavens.
My spirit is
My
shining.
spirit shines because I love the Lord forever, always.
Awesome life.
Whatever they say, I will never give up on the will.
I know that my life's so awesome.
All right, so let's get into today's word study. And every Thursday we have Q&A Thursday. We have questions from the audience, people, listeners from around the world, and we have two very, very good questions. The first question comes from Patreon. They left me a message there, and I hope that this very, very good question. So let's take a look at this one, and we'll go into this first question here. It says, I would like to ask, since our level of rapture also depends on our realization on the word and how we take action on the word, how close our thoughts and mind we are to the Lord, we all need time to digest those words. What about those that do not have much time to learn and realize? Right? So here's a good question. Yeah, when it comes to our rapture, it's about the realization of the words and how to put them into action. Like that is like the core, right? Did you listen to the words? Did you put them into action, right? And your action, how you put things into action is going to be solely dependent upon how deeply you realized. But then the question might come is, what about the people that don't really have much time to learn and realize? So there are two things I wanted to talk about this, right? Two things that are important for us to realize. The first one is time is not the issue. Right? Time is not the issue. Oh, do I have enough time to realize? Do I have enough time to put into action? If the real issue was about having enough time, then procrastination would not exist, right? Because, what do we do for procrastination? We wait until the last day, and then at the last moment, we do the most important thing. And in the end, it still works out because people become super hyper-focused in those last moments, right? So you're hyper-focused, and when you're hyper-focused, you can get yourself into a position you can realize or do things at a higher level than those that are not hyper-focused, but they might only be half-focused, but doing it for 3-4 days, right? So, and if we think about time, time would be a bigger issue if every single person if realization was the same amount of time for every person, right? So let's say that it's all about time, which means that it always takes 4 years for every single person to realize deeply. If that's the case, then time is an issue, because then you're sitting there like, oh my gosh, I only have 2 years left, but it takes 4 years for me to realize deeply. The thing we understand is that every person is different. Some people realize slower, some people realize quicker. And then on top of that, it depends on your efforts. How much you realize will depend on how much effort and how much you prepare to realize at the situation, right? So what Sunseam says is realization, like when it comes to like listening to the word, the Sunday message, the 30 lessons, whatever it is, it really depends on how prepared you are to listen. And this is why some people can listen to the Sunday message just once, realize super deeply, while others don't even remember the title. So if you look at the Saturday pre-dawn message from last week, Sunseam talked about don't take notes, right? Don't take notes. Don't focus on the notes. Be focused so that you can memorize the entire message after listening to it once. And Sunseam says, yeah, that's what I do. I am so focused on it. Look at my notes. And he rips his notes apart and says, guess what? I memorized everything. I don't even need these notes. Right? So what's it really about? The first thing we have to think to ourselves is it's not so much about the time. It's about preparation. Are you ready to listen to the word? Have you prayed deeply and you've cried out to God, I want to hear these words? Because if you haven't, right? And sometimes we're not prepared. We got to go back and reread and try to realize even more deeply. But this is something where Sunseam says you don't have to listen to the word like 25 times, 10, 20, 30, 40 times. You just got to listen to it once properly, and then you can realize, right? So the first thing is time is not really the issue that we're really dealing with. The second thing I'm going to talk about is about a progressive history. Right? Like reinventing the wheel. Like, what does that mean? All right. So because we're in a progressive history, we don't ever need to reinvent the wheel. right? So it's something like once someone discovers the wheel, then everyone can use that wheel to, reinvent the wheel means that even though someone discovered the wheel, you say, no, 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 and then you go off and you start from the beginning again, but you end up with the same result of having that wheel. The one thing great about a progressive history is someone invents the wheel out of rocks, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing. We could do so much with this. And then someone takes that rock and says, you know what, let's make it lighter. Let's use this instead. Let's use grass instead, or whatever it is. Let's use rubber, something that is more durable and something that is lighter, right? So instead of reinventing it, we are making it better and better. Progressively, the wheel gets better and better. And look at the wheels today. They last for like 100,000 miles, right? That's how much wear and tear these wheels can take, right? And this is the reason why technology and science grow exponentially. We are constantly riding the backs of past discoveries and past inventions, right? Look at computers. Look at the computers in the past, in my age, in the 80s. Computers took up an entire floor of a building, and now they fit on your wrist. Why? It's because they are inventing on top of other people's inventions. We're progressively making things better and better, right? Because once someone discovers something amazing, we share the knowledge and we create on top of that and make it better. We innovate, we invent and innovate, right? So, that's why we go to school. We go to school to learn. We learn the successes and how to become more successful, and we learn from the failures of the past so we don't go through those failures again. And this is how we're able to get ourselves into a better position. So we're learning constantly of what works and what doesn't work. And this is why there's so much growth. Now, what does this have to do with not having enough time to realizing, what if there's not enough time left, right? Well, let's just say right now, let's pretend right now we're in the year 999. Like, remember, this is 1,000-year history, right? So we have 1,000 years, and at the end of 1,000 years, it's supposed to finish, right? So let's just say we're in year 999, which means there's only 1 year left. So what happens to those people who come to this history in year 999 and they may feel that they don't have enough time to realize and grow? Like, oh my goodness, what can I do? Like, these people all had 30, 40 years to realize and grow, but I've only got 1 year left. And that's incorrect thinking, right? Why? Because they're learning on top of all the realizations and growth of the past 999 years, which means they are starting at a higher level than everyone else. Let me give you an example. Think about the people who came to Providence in the 80s, in the 1980s. Well, we might think to ourselves as, oh my gosh, they had so much time to realize and grow. Like, how can I realize at that level? And the answer is, well, think about it. The present day word of the Holy Son, the deeper realization of the rapture, the resurrection, the purpose of creation, right? And all these, like, they all came out in like 2012, 2013, which means all the people in the 80s didn't know what we learned in 2012 and 2013. They had no idea. But imagine someone who comes in 2014, 2015. They're going to be coming on top of the realizations of 2012, 2013. They're going to be learning Holy Son from the beginning. They're not going to be spending 30, 40 years like thinking back of, oh, we didn't learn this before. It means that even though people come early and they have more time, the level of the word isn't as high as it is right now. And that's why everyone who comes later are coming on top of the higher level word and the deeper realizations that are going to be taught, even more than it was in 1980, 1990, or the year 2000. The starting point is higher. So that's why I wouldn't worry so much about not having enough time to realize and grow. We are all riding on the backs of our ancestors of faith who went through all that stuff just to raise the level so that the next group of people are starting at a higher level, right? And that's why in the end, it's really up to each and every one of us individually in how much we seek, how much we knock, how much we prepare to listen to the message. And that's going to determine how deeply we realize the word too. So to answer that question is, what about those that don't have much time to learn and realize? it's not going to be unfair because they're going to be riding on the level of the word that is way higher than the people before them. And that's why they're already starting at a level where the realizations is much higher than people who came in 1980, right? Yes, they might, the people in the 1980s took more action. They, and they have better the closer relationship with something. They spent more time in this history and they know the words inside out, right? However, when it comes to the realizations, the most important part is what? Is the Sunday message. And the Sunday message is never the same. So when you come now, you can, even if you're a newcomer, if you prepare well, you can realize more about this Sunday's message than someone who's been in Providence for 20 to 30 years. You can. It's very possible, right? And that's why it's an individual race. And we don't have to worry too much about, oh no, but what about my rapture level? Because it's not something that is, it's not about time. Time is not the issue. It's about the preparation and also understanding that people who come later are going to be starting at a much, much higher level than the people that came in the past, right? I came in 1998. So 1998 is such a long time ago. However, when I think about it, it's like, wow, I came in 1998. The word now is much it's much more deeper. It's not different. It's so much deeper. And the people coming today are learning it at that depth. All right. I hope that makes sense to you when it comes to that question. Second question comes from YouTube, I believe, right? And this is a question, very, very interesting. It says, "Hey, Pastor Sky." I think this came from Instagram. Yeah. It says, "Hey, Pastor Sky, can I seek your help? I have a former faith friend who is not convinced that there is a holding area in the spiritual world for the spirits of people who died without believing in Jesus or God, and there is no second chance for salvation after you die, after your bodily death, right? The reason is because she said that there is not enough scriptures in the Bible to back this up, even though I showed her the verse, 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19, which talks about the spirits in prison from the time of Noah, right? Instead, she told me that there are many verses in the Bible that shows how humans will go straight to hell without believing in God and Jesus, okay? So may I ask if you know what are some other verses in the Bible besides 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19 that I can use to back up how there is a second chance for salvation, and how would you explain this concept to former faith people like her? Hope to seek your help and advice of how I can explain, okay? Now, there are a couple of misconceptions and wrong thoughts on both sides here, on both the friend and the person writing to me, okay? So the first thing I'm going to look at is the person who, the former faith friend. And they said you need more than one scripture. And I say that's false. You don't need more than one scripture. The Bible is absolutely the words of God. And to not accept because there's only one verse on it means that each single verse is not important. It's in the Bible, which means that verse must be taken seriously. And the real question to ask in the situation when it's 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19 is, what is the context? Is this what really is being talked about? Let me read the entire chapter. Let me read if there's anything else that backs this up or something along that line. So to just say that, oh, there's only one verse, so that verse doesn't matter anymore would be incorrect. That's a misconception. The second thing that I think that the former faith friend did wrong is they said they gave you a sweeping generalization like, oh, there's so many verses in the Bible that says that people will go straight to hell if they don't believe in Jesus. Two things I would say. Number one is I would ask for those verses. Yeah, okay, well, if there's so many verses, give me a couple of them. Right, that say that you will go straight to hell. And that misconception, the thing that's wrong about her, not her, but about this former faith friend is they said there's verses in the Bible that say these people will go straight to hell, which means instantaneously. And I would say that would be incorrect. Why? Because in the Bible, when it comes to people going to hell, there is no timeline. The only timeline I know about people going to hell is after the 1,000-year kingdom is done. That's in Revelation chapter 20, where it says that people eventually be judged and go to heaven and hell, which is at the end of the 1,000 years. So that's the only one I've seen that kind of gives you a time frame. But everything else, to say that there's Bible verses that say that if you don't believe in Jesus, when you die, at that moment, you will go straight to hell. There's not a verse like that. That gives you the time frame of straight to hell. And that's why I would say that also is a misconception. And I would ask for those verses and go over those verses. Now, the misconception or the wrong thing that the member wrote to me about this is they said that, of course I'm going to go into the nitty-gritty right now and say why the person writing, the member who's asking for my help, is also wrong. So they said that, guess what? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19, it shows that people are in spiritual prisons and they got a chance to hear the gospel, right? However, this is where it's wrong. Saying that there is a second chance after death, physical death for salvation, that is incorrect. There is no second chance after death. You can't. Impossible. There's no second chance. We do not teach that there is a second chance for salvation after physical death. There will never be a second chance for salvation after physical death. And then someone might say to me, wait, that doesn't make any sense because it's clear in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20, it says that these people were waiting to hear the gospel, right? But we're not teaching that they get a second chance after death. It's not a second chance. The people who are waiting patiently in the days of Noah, who are in the spiritual prison, they are waiting for their first chance. And there's the big issue, because it is 100% true. Once you go to hell, you cannot escape. There's no second chance to it, right? There's no second chance. The people at the time of Noah didn't even get a first chance. Why? Because Jesus wasn't even born yet. The gospel wasn't even preached yet at the time of Noah. Jesus came, 2,300 years later, which means they got their first chance. And this is why Jesus preached to the spirits in prison, because they never got a chance to hear the gospel because they died before he came, right? And the way we understand this is not a second chance. It's still their first chance, right? So everyone after Jesus comes who's heard the gospel, they will get a chance. And then you have to think about this carefully. Well, what about, when Jesus first came, when Jesus came, he died on the cross and the gospel started to be preached. It was preached only in the Roman Empire. But what about the people in other parts of the world that never got a chance? They haven't got a first chance yet. See, the issue that we are teaching is this. Jesus is salvation, and no one goes to heaven without believing in Jesus. And the big question is, but what about the people who died before Jesus? Or what about the people who died without ever hearing the gospel? Does that mean God will send these people to hell because they were born at the wrong time or born in the wrong place? What about those people, you go to those native, those islands when there's untouched civilizations? These untouched civilizations are there and they've never heard the gospel. If they die, they're going to hell. Will God send these people to hell? And the answer is absolutely not. God is not that type of God. Remember, in order for people to gain faith, Romans chapter 10, verse 17 says, faith comes from hearing the message. But if that message isn't preached yet, or it hasn't reached your country or region or tribe yet, it means that they can't have faith because it hasn't reached them. They can't hear it. So the people in the Old Testament, right? Look at the people in the Old Testament. Since the Messiah hasn't come, they cannot receive salvation, right? Because you only get salvation when the Messiah comes. But since the Messiah didn't come in the Old Testament time, none of them can receive salvation. So when the people of the Old Testament die, how are they judged? Well, what judges our spirit is the gospel, the words of God. So if the gospel and the words of God aren't there, you cannot be judged spiritually. You can only be judged physically by what you do, which means people in the Old Testament, when they die, they only die in the body, but their spirits await the coming of the Messiah. They need to hear the gospel. They need to hear the word to be judged by that word. So there's a couple of verses you can take a look at here that helps us. It's all in the book of Romans. Romans chapter 2, verse 12 said that all that sin apart from law perish apart from law, and all that sin under the law will be judged by that law. What does that mean? You can't be judged by that law until you hear it first. Romans chapter 5, verse 13 says the same thing. Sin is not taken into account when there is no law. Right? Romans chapter 7, verse 8, apart from law, sin is dead. You cannot be judged by this spiritual law if you have never heard it. So your spirit can never be judged until you hear the spiritual law. And this is why people in the Old Testament and also people today that have never heard the gospel, not even once, because they never heard it, they get a chance to hear it. So that's why if you say a second chance after death, it means that they already heard the gospel and then they get a second chance after. No, that's not going to happen. That's a second chance, and that is wrong, right? So we do not teach the second chance. We teach that people always get a fair chance to hear the gospel, which is while you're living here on this earth. And if you never had a chance to hear it on this earth, you will hear it in the spiritual world, right? But if you hear it on the earth and you reject it and then you die, then you're done, right? You rejected it and then you die, you're done. There's no second chance at that point. Okay, so that's why that's the wrong way of teaching it. And this is why every Christian, and even myself, will say that's wrong. There's no second chance. And I'll say, no, there's no second chance after you die. While you're living, you may get 10, 20 chances to hear the gospel, right? But after you die, there's no second chance, right? So let's go one step further. Now, what about the righteous people? Moses, Abraham, Elijah, right? What about the righteous people like Abraham? What about the righteous people? They never heard the gospel. So does that mean, well, where do they go? And this is where we get into the verses that start to talk about the different levels of the spiritual world. So the first verse I'm going to show you, this it's quite interesting just to whet the palate, is the story that Jesus gives in Luke chapter 16, verse 19 through 31 about the rich man and Lazarus. And it talks about when the righteous and the wicked die, where do they go? Interestingly, the righteous person, the beggar who is righteous, doesn't go to God, doesn't go to Jesus. He goes to Abraham. They're with Abraham, the father of faith. They're in a good place for righteous people waiting for the Messiah. On the other hand, where does the wicked person go? The wicked person goes to Hades. So we said like, oh, this is interesting. We have Abraham going to Abraham's side, and then we have Hades. Now, some might say, well, Abraham's side is heaven because Abraham, Moses, and the righteous, they all went to heaven after they died. But this is a contradiction to what we believe. It doesn't make sense because then you're saying that people can go to heaven without Jesus. Think about it. At the time of Abraham, 2,000 years before Jesus, if he dies and goes to heaven, then what's the point of Jesus? You don't need Jesus then. You don't need Jesus if you're already going to heaven anyways, like Abraham, Moses, and them. If Abraham can go to heaven without Jesus, then we don't need Jesus because you're already going without him. But we are saying that the only way to heaven is through Jesus. You cannot go without him. So just like Jesus, and if you look at one step further, if Abraham, Moses, and them are going to heaven without Jesus coming, without the Messiah coming, another thing that doesn't make sense, Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 2, that even Jesus has to go and prepare a place for us to be within heaven, which means they're going to heaven, which is unprepared, because Jesus is the one that goes to prepare it. But he doesn't say that until 2,000 years after Abraham. So Abraham's going to an unprepared heaven. What does that mean? Right? So that's something that, if people ever bring up, then what about, that these righteous people went to heaven? The answer is they couldn't. It contradicts what we believe, that it's only through Christ, only through the Messiah you go to heaven. So let's go back to the original topic, right? When I was talking about if faith comes through hearing the message and you die before Jesus comes, if faith comes through hearing the message and you die before the gospel reaches your country, your city, your town, your village, then there is a necessity for other worlds, other places in the spiritual world. So is Abraham's side heaven? Is Hades really hell? What is a spiritual prison in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19? Because these people need to wait for the coming of the Messiah. So now we have to look at it. It says, well, that means there needs to be a waiting place for people to wait for the Messiah. It's absolutely necessary. And one way you could look at it is this. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 and 17. It talks about the rapture. But interestingly, in verse 16, at the very end, it says, the people who are dead in Christ must rise first. Right? So when the Lord's second coming comes, he's going to call for the rapture. And the weird thing about this rapture is that everyone gets raptured and goes into heaven. Both those that are dead in Christ and those that are alive, which means all the people that died before the Lord's second coming are all going to meet the Lord in the air, and then they're all going to go to heaven together. But then in our heads, we're like, wait, that doesn't make sense, because if I believe in Jesus and I die, am I not going directly to heaven? But the whole point of the Lord's second coming is to take us to heaven. That's why it doesn't really make any sense. Why do we need to rise if we're already in heaven? Rising from where? Rising from heaven? No, heaven's above, it's in the highest place. What does that mean? Well, let's go into Revelation chapter 20. And there's a couple of verses here that you need to look at. Now, when you look from verse 7 down to verse 12, verse 7 talks about, all of Revelation chapter 20 talks about the 1,000-year kingdom. So when the Lord's second coming comes, there's a 1,000-year reign, a 1,000-year kingdom, right? Interestingly, verse 7 talks about what happens after the 1,000 years are over. And verse 12 says, well, after the 1,000 years are over, people will finally be judged and the book of life is open and everyone will be judged either to heaven and hell, which brings up a brand new concept of heaven being opened after the 1,000-year reign of the Lord's second coming, which means, well, then where are we staying during those 1,000 years? So if heaven isn't even open until after the 1,000 years, where are people going to be? And then we're like, okay, well then let's take a look at, is there any other scriptures that prove that there are different levels of heaven? Well, stay in Revelation chapter 20. In Revelation chapter 20, look at verse 1 and 2. It says, Satan will be bound in the abyss for the 1,000 years. So people might say, isn't the abyss hell? And the answer is no, because after the 1,000 years are over, look at verse 14. Verse 14 says, in verse 10, 7 to 10. So verse 1 and 2 says Satan is bound for 1,000 years, but hell is forever. So abyss is not hell, because it would be forever. But abyss is only 1,000 years. And then you look at verses 7 through 10, what does it say? It says that then Satan is thrown into hell after the 1,000 years. So now you see that abyss and hell are two different places. And then someone might say, like, what about Hades? Is Hades the same as hell? Because isn't Hades just the Greek word for the underworld? And the answer is yes, it is the Greek word for the underworld. But if you look at Revelation chapter 20, verse 14, interestingly, it says that Hades, everyone will come out of Hades and then be thrown into hell, which means Hades and hell are different places too. It's showing different levels, right? So we see here that Hades is not hell, and also you're understanding that Abraham's side may not be that. And then you have 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 19 that says there's a prison. Also in 1 Samuel chapter 28, verses 7 through 15, this is when King Saul goes to a medium to talk to Samuel. And guess what happens? Verse 13, where does Samuel come from? He does not come from heaven. He comes from the earth. His spirit, like a ghostly figure, comes out of the earth, not from heaven, right? So you're going to see that, there's multiple concepts that need to be taught in order for someone of the former faith to understand very, very clearly. Do you understand what I mean? Like, if it's someone not from the former faith, you don't need all the concepts and ideas I'm talking about right now. But if you're talking to someone in the former faith, they need more than just, look at it says here, that means there's more than one world, right? And on top of that, we do need to teach properly. It's not a second chance. Everyone gets a chance, but not a second chance after you die. Once you're in hell, you can never get out. It is impossible, right? So this is how I would, I'm kind of going over it very, very quickly right now, but you kind of get the concepts that I'm talking about here too, right? And this is like, when I talked about Romans, about, if a sin apart from law is dead, right? If you don't have the law, if you haven't heard the gospel, you can't be judged by that gospel. That comes from the judgment of flood lesson, because, why is it only the people in Mesopotamia were judged and the rest of the world wasn't judged by water? Well, because by that, it's the character of God. God is not going to judge these people if they haven't heard the word. In the time of Noah, who are the only ones that heard a flood was coming from Noah? Only the people Noah talked to in his region. And they are the only ones liable to be judged by it. Everyone else around the world, in China, in Australia, in America, never heard what Noah said. And that's why they cannot be judged by it. You can only be judged by what you've heard, if that makes sense, right? So that's kind of why I'm bringing this up for this. I'm bringing these points up to you. Then these are all points that I would use in order to teach a Christian about the different levels of the spiritual world. But it cannot be just taught like, hey, these are the different levels. Got to go through all the principles and theories behind it so that they can get the full picture, right? But, if I was former faith and you said second chance after you die physically, then I would already shut off. Because I'd be like, no, that's impossible. This is heretical teaching. I would say that. Because no, that's impossible. That's not going to work. So I would reiterate and talk about the mistake you made in the way you taught and teach in a way like, okay, so this is the mistake that I made. Because technically she's right. Oh, she or he, whoever he or she is, whoever they are, they're correct. There is no second chance after physical death. Okay, so that's kind of the two questions. Hope it's there's a lot of verses and a lot of concepts in there. So hopefully you guys can listen to it again if you need to talk about this, so you can teach someone from the former faith properly. Okay. All right, there it is, guys. That is Q&A Thursday, a long Q&A Thursday, but I hope that you guys gained a lot from this too. So let's get into the second break of the day. Okay, so let's get into our final segment on this Thursday podcast. And of course, I have sermons in the sky. And today, kind of like last week, because the Q&A was a bit long, I'm going to go into a very, very short sermons in the sky today, and just a small realization that I was having while I was thinking about the last 4 years and how difficult they really were. And I hope it's something that can resonate with all of you out there. So I was thinking about like the last 4 years, the pandemic that went for like over 3 years, the lockdowns, and now we have the economy that's terrible, and inflation, recession is like around the corner, and on top of it, we went through this spiritual Oppenheimer, and it's just so much we went through, and just to be alive right now, I think is amazing. Like, we have really, really done well just to be here at this point right now. And the one thing that holds true, and I want everyone to really think about, is there's something that came into my mind when I thought about all these things that have happened. God is fair and just. If we really believe that God is fair and just, it means that he sees what is unfair in the world. And if he's just, he will pay it back. And I was thinking about this. I was like, it's not just for the bad things that happen to us. We shouldn't just look at, oh, these people did bad things to us and this happened to us. So, God will repay those people according to what they've done. But actually, there's two people are going to be repaid. Not just the person who did the wrong, but also the person that received the wrong. See, look back at all the things that happened to us too. All the unfair things, the unjust things, the things that we had no power over. They just happened. That spiritual earthquake and people's faiths were shaking. And I realized, or God spoke to my heart and he said, know that the suffering we go through now will all be paid back. And the stronger and the more heavy and the more harsher the suffering we went through over the last 4 years, the more God will repay. So don't just think that this time is difficult. Know that the more difficult and harsh the situation you go through, the more you will be repaid. And why is this something important? I really felt this is important because if we don't fully realize that God will repay us back for what we go through, then it becomes really hopeless and we become negative. And we think to ourselves God, don't you see what's happening to me? And we kind of put ourselves into this victim mentality that this is all happening to me and God, you don't care. But if you truly believe with all your heart that God is fair and God is just, then you will not be worried about the future. You're going to know that whatever you went through, we're going to be repaid. And that is something that's comforting if we really deeply realize this. But here's the thing. There are times where we're repaid by God and we feel that it's not enough. And then there's times we get repaid by God and we think it's too much. And God, is that really fair? If you pay me not as much as I deserve, that's not fair. But then on the flip side, if you pay me more than I deserve, I kind of feel I just feel like I don't deserve it. No one wants more and no one wants us. That's not fair. But I realize sometimes the situations are not as bad as we think. Situations are bad, but we make it worse. Why? Because of our attitude, because of our negativity, because of our bad mentality, because we look at things in the wrong way. And because of that attitude and mentality, we look at the situation and it's even harder than what it actually is. And then when God finally repays us back, we're like, wait, I suffered way more than this. But the answer is, he repays you back according to the suffering you went through, what someone did to you. The other suffering is you put on yourself. We suffered because of ourselves, and then we think, oh, well, God didn't pay us fairly. And the answer is, he absolutely did. And on the flip side, when do we feel like God paid us more than we deserve? It's when we are so entrusting everything to God, that we know that God is good, that there is a reason for all things to happen, where we sit there and say, God, let your will be done, like Jesus did before the cross. When we realize it's always a time to rejoice because God is with us. And there's always a time to give thanks, even in the worst of worst circumstances. It reminds me of the verse in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 16 through 18. It says, rejoice always, pray continually, and give thanks in all situations and circumstances. And when we're in that mode, when we're always thankful, we're always rejoicing, even things that are really bad in life are not that bad. And you can rejoice even in tribulation. You can rejoice even in suffering. You can rejoice even in pain. And when God blesses us, we're even more thankful. Like, God, I never deserved this. I never deserved any of this in the first place, but God, you have always taken care of me, and I will continue to trust you until the end. And I hope that as we're going through the struggles and as we're going through the things where sometimes we reach the edge, we reach the point where like, I could leave right now, that we'll realize again, God is fair and God is just, and he will make sure that not a single one of us will not be repaid for every single hardship, difficulty, and suffering that people have put upon us. So I hope that this is something that really resonates to a lot of you out there. And it's just something that I was thinking about, and this is why the inspirations came to me at this time. All right? So I hope that everyone really just enjoy your Thursday. It's almost the end of the week. Have a good time and prepare nice for the weekend. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like